So how does one go about choosing a therapist? As a mostly seasoned professional in the field of mental health, I am embarrassed to say that I wasn't entirely sure. Until now. Today, we talk with Dylan Kersh and Anicia Williams, both licensed marriage and family therapists in the fair county of Marin. Together, we discuss how to effectively wade through the swamp of available clinicians, but also the elements that make for a strong therapeutic fit. We take a dive into everything from race, gender, socioeconomic status to spiritual orientation, as well as provide detailed information on the dizzying array of available therapeutic modalities, motivational interviewing, EMDR, and something called somatic therapy, and how to know which one may be the best fit for you. We also discuss how to navigate the cost of therapy. What is a sliding scale? How do you approach your insurance company for reimbursement if you are out of network? My name is Benjamin Russick, licensed marriage and family therapist, and this is my podcast, Look, Just Tell Me What to Do. All right, folks, I am here with the fabulous Anicia Williams, marriage and family therapist. Hello, Anicia.
Hi.
I am here with the equally fabulous Dylan Kersh, MFT. How are you, Dylan?
I'm good.
And we are here in the amazing, fantastic, beautiful, stupendous, lovely, luscious, bucolic Marin County and at Dylan's house. He was gracious enough to have me come up here and do this podcast. What we're doing today is how to choose a therapist. I was wanting to do this podcast because I need to find a therapist because I'm losing my mind because I've got too many clients.
Ben, I'm full. I'm sorry. I can't take you right now.
You can't take me?
No.
You bastard.
Yeah.
Are you full, Anicia?
I am full.
That would be a dual relationship though, wouldn't it? Because I kind of know
Absolutely.
Alicia. So let's just start with basic introductions. Anicia, how do I know you?
I believe we met at Bayside Marin
We did.
probably 10 years ago.
10 years
around
ago.
that time. I was a therapist in the intensive outpatient program, and you were up top in residential.
Yeah. And Dylan, how do I know you?
Well, I guess for those people who didn't check out our previous podcast, where we went fully into that in great detail, you were a employee at a sober living environment, a sober living home where I lived when I was in early sobriety many years ago. And we have maintained a professional and personal connection since.
Yeah.
And now we are esteemed colleagues.
Yeah. Well, and what the great thing is that Dylan is one of the very few, I say this with some trepidation, male heterosexual therapists that I know. And I say that because it's a niche. There's not very many.
It's one of the few places where we are valued. We are not like the dominant
thing.
I have 3 very good friends that are male therapists, Dylan included.
Yeah.
But I don't know a lot more.
Okay.
I don't know a lot more male therapists.
Yeah, they're rare.
You've chosen well with the 3 of us.
I have.
White and straight as well.
They are white and straight.
Yeah.
I am not white and kind of crooked.
All right. So what are people to do when they are out there in the world losing their shit? They know they need mental health care and they don't know how to get it. There's Psychology Today, which is a swamp of therapist profiles. Mm-hmm. And then what if there is no word of mouth? What if they don't know anybody in the field? What are people to do?
I think a really good place to start is asking people that you know if they're in therapy and if they have therapists and if they like their therapists, and if so, why not? I think it's really good to get just kind of an example of what is going on out there, because some people are so unfamiliar with therapy that they don't even know what happens in the room.
Right.
And so it's always nice to just ask other people if you're comfortable, if they're in therapy, and if so, what does that look like? And how did you find this person? And what do you like about them? And so I think it's a really good idea to start with, what is therapy?
So that's one way, is that you find one person who really loves their therapist and talk about that. And then, well, if that therapist can't see you, then maybe he or she will know someone who can. Good therapists tend to stick together. I like to think that.
I feel like there's this difference between how people choose a therapist versus how I would suggest people choose a therapist. Just like with dating, people tend to just jump in through a friend. Oh, you'd like, Johnny. A lot of people do that, but they don't really have what they're looking for really solid. They just kind of go with it, and then they end up disappointed over and over again. I think that we could pretty well here in this podcast come up with a checklist for people to go through in terms of things they should consider before they even start the process. Because on Psychology Today, you're just reading these 1 or 2 paragraph blurbs, and usually what people do is they just kind of pick up a vibe. Oh, I read your thing. It was like the person's like a looser, more casual person, or they're maybe new agey, or maybe they are very structured and rigid, and they hear, very, I do XYZ therapy, very structured, and I think people go with that, but I don't think that's the best way to pick a therapist, is what's comfortable for you.
Right. The worst way is to kind of sit there and look at the menu like you're at a Chinese restaurant. You know how they have the little Chinese characters next to the thing? You know what I've heard? I've heard that actually those characters are actually a totally separate menu for like Chinese people that eat.
My friend Emily is Malaysian and speaks several Asian languages. And when we go to an Asian
Shout
restaurant,
out Emily.
Shout out Emily Lai, Murray, love you. She orders things that are never on the menu. And she has like a conversation with them. It'll be in Malaysian or some other language that I don't know. And we get this entire feast of things that were not available to
I want to
all of
go
the
out
other
to eat
people
with
there.
her.
Yeah. She's a chef as well.
Are you single,
awesome.
Ben?
What?
Shout out Masak.
What?
Are you single? Because I'm making a joke because we're talking about dating.
I'm
through your friends.
perpetually single, yes.
Let's not talk about that.
Well, we don't have to.
Then you do need a therapist.
By choice, maybe. Serially single? Serially monogamous? Anyway, there's no joke there. Okay, so it's not like a menu. You can't just sit down. That's probably the worst way, is to kind of like get blinded by all the information. So you want to set up a process. What do you mean, Dylan? What kind of process?
So I feel like there's two major tracks. Three. The first is demographics. Things like race, sexuality, gender, etc. matter to you. And they very well may matter to you. And it may be very important that they matter to you, depending on your experience. The second is, in the classic psychoanalytic psychodynamic model, where there's this concept of transference, which is when we have a therapist, we transfer on to them generally the issues that we haven't worked out or resolved yet with our parent of that same gender. It's not a perfect science, but it's a general way to think about it. So if you're somebody who has a lot of issues in relationships with men, I would think a male therapist might be a better choice for you right now, and vice versa. And then the third is the specific issues that you're dealing with. And then thinking about the orientation of that therapist. So EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and restabilization. Don't need to get into it, but it's a specific trauma therapy. So if you're someone with PTSD or really some significant trauma, that may be a super important factor for you to consider. Other people are really like, they're more like a logical type. They like homework. And they feel like they're dealing with thinking problems and they're in their head a lot. So maybe CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, you want to find a specialist in that. Recovery and addiction, which all three of us specialize in. If you have substance abuse issues, it's really important to get someone who's very proficient in working in addiction and recovery. So those would be the three areas that I think are important to consider before you make your decision.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Anisha, what do you think of that structure?
I agree with those. There's something you said in there that kind of, I was like, what do you think about the idea of if you've had problems with a male in your life, a father figure, grandfather, it might be that you would choose a female because you are untrusting of men, right? So I was just thinking about the gender issues and how that could go either way. But I agree with all of those things. I think thinking about your issues is probably the best way to start thinking about therapy. What is it that I want to work on? What is the style that I need? If I am perpetually someone who knows that they let themselves off the hook, maybe I need somebody who's going to hold me accountable, somebody who's a little more structured, giving homework, things like that. It's funny. You sit and you think about all these things. What are the issues I need to work on? Then you try to match that up with a therapist who has the skills to work on. And that's an area too, right? Does this therapist have the skills to work on what I need help with? And so that kind of interview process where we're interviewing them to see if we're a good match and they're interviewing us, what kind of credentials do they have? Do you want a psychologist? Do you want a psychiatrist? Do you want a therapist? Do you want a counselor? And then when you do that interview, can you look at this person's face? Can you, I'm serious, can you listen to their voice?
That's
My
funny.
first therapist, not going to throw her under the bus, loved her, but she sounded like Julia Childs.
Oh, no.
And so when I would be thinking about our sessions, it's like,
you do it
well,
in- can you do it-
Anicia,
yeah.
can you think about the issues that led you to therapy? And it's like, I loved her. She was helpful, but that
Oh my
voice
God.
was...
That's hilarious.
And so as silly as it sounds, yeah, it needs to be someone that you can sit across from every week for at least 50 minutes
Yeah.
and someone that you feel that they have unconditional positive regard for you, right? If you think someone's
What's
judging
that,
you.
Anisha?
Unconditional positive regard.
Yes, what does that mean?
So that is, if I am working with you and I'm your therapist, I am seeing you in a positive light and I am reframing the negative things that you're bringing to our session in a positive way for you to be able to see that the things that you consider defaults are actually ways that you survived.
Yeah.
And so that unconditional positive regard is someone looking at you, and it's kind of like unconditional love, right? I'm going to support you no matter what. I'm going to try to help you no matter what. And I'm going to frame these things that you see as weaknesses as ways that you survived and got here.
I want to add one little thing about the reframing thing. Patients, they come in, they love to complain. And I said, look, your problems are a measure of how successful you are. It's like, oh, you're having a fight with your husband. Oh, you're married.
Right.
Your kids are mad at you. Oh, you have children. So you are able to have kids. You can afford to have a house with kids in them. You did that. Well,
Good job.
You know what? They're going to fire me from my job. So someone hired you at some point.
I love that.
Anyway, I just wanted to add that in.
That.
We're throwing around a lot of terms, and one of the things I wanted to get into, you guys are saying like CBT, DBT. No one knows what CBT is. It's just alphabet soup to them. They hear it and they're like, "What is that? Is it CBT plus?" Like, no, it's not a CBT plus.
2.0.
2.0. Like what's going on here? Do I have to add letters to it at some point? How do they chew through that?
I got an idea.
Okay.
I feel like if you were to throw out a hypothetical client or two,
right,
then Anicia and I could say what type of therapy we think might be best for that client and describe what that therapy means and such. What do you think about that?
Let's do
it.
Just
came to me. I'm spitballing.
Okay. All right.
Somebody stop me.
All right. No, that's good. And then we can rope in these three things that you worked on, which is basically demographics, the transference piece, the gender transference stuff, and that was the second one. And the third one was their specific issues and this philosophical orientation of the therapist. All right. So, and I guess any of us can do that, right? So I'll throw out one, y'all throw out one.
Ooh, this is gonna be fun.
Yeah. I like it.
So let's see. I'm gonna make a female. She's 26 years old. Her name is Jay. Is that a female name?
It can be.
You can put a D in there and just Jade.
Jade, that's better. Okay, her name is Jade, and she's got bright blue hair, piercings, gorgeous tattoos on her legs and arms. She's a go-getter, very extroverted, kind of a people pleaser, but has some deep trauma issues from her childhood with an uncle. Something happened. We don't really know what. Wasn't good. And sometimes she has panic attacks when she's on a date, or she gets intimate or close to anybody. She starts getting very anxious and she tends to push people away. She's one of those people that is so together. It's kind of shocking when she comes unwound, and it shocks herself, I would suppose. She suddenly realizes, she goes on a date and she's like, has another thing happen. And she's like, oh my God, I can't, this something, I need to do something.
We're talking sexual trauma, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds like it. Yeah.
I feel like you have that sensorimotor training. I feel like this would be a good one for you.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're talking about someone who has trauma. Obviously, it's too early to tell if Jade has PTSD or not because she's very high functioning. So what am I? Am I a friend? Am I who? She's listening to the podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a call-in show.
It's a call-in
show.
Jade wants to know what kind of therapist. So I am thinking that she sounds like she's having some problem staying inside her window of tolerance, that her central nervous system is offline, which is why she's having these panic attacks and why she's having these adverse reactions when she gets too close to people. So from a somatic standpoint, we're going to want her to see a problem. Yeah.
What is somatic?
Oh, great question.
And what's the window of tolerance?
I apologize for interrupting.
No,
so let's
those are a lot of words.
This is my second time, so I know that I have to define all my terms.
What is somatic?
This is therapy for trauma that is of the veins of Peter Levine and
Janina Fisher
around the idea that trauma is something that is held in the body. You know, you could have talk therapy for years and you may still have this trauma locked in your body Jade might have this trauma from childhood that's locked in her body, and that affects how she operates in the world, and it affects her central nervous system, and it affects the ways that she is in communication and relationship with other people. So coming from a somatic standpoint, we would want to be trying to release that trauma from the body through various different techniques. That's not the only trauma therapy. For someone like Jade, I don't think we would be recommending EMDR. I don't typically try to use EMDR if it's complex PTSD and complex kind of like developmental trauma. Am I still throwing out too many terms?
No, it's okay. So I'm just going to pause. So EMDR is a therapy you do this thing where
you want me to do it? I'm trained in EMDR.
Yeah, please. Yeah. What is EMDR?
So backtrack super quick. Window of tolerance is the emotional range at which you can tolerate the feelings in your body. And if at any point the emotions that are coming into your body are too much for you to tolerate, you'll either become hyper aroused, which is flooding and just getting super emotional, kind of decompensating that way, or hypo aroused, which is numbing out, just disconnecting from your body, dissociating.
Yeah. So on the far scale of that, we have dissociation, whereas on the hyperarousal, you have like mania, excitement, anxiety.
And so that's a good way for us to assess. If somebody has a lot of trauma, they will often get outside their window of tolerance. So it's a good way for you to know if you have trauma. Sometimes if you're either feeling like whenever something happens emotional, you're either getting hyper aroused or hypo aroused.
And you can't regulate. You can't emotionally regulate.
You just never know when it's going to start storming in your mind.
Yeah, like something crazy happens to me and I get into a car accident and I step out of my car and I'm pretty calm. Like, this sucks. No one's hurt.
Right.
This sucks. We have to deal with insurance.
Right.
But someone who's not emotionally regulated gets out, they're screaming, they're histrionic, even though no one's hurt and it's really not that bad of damage. They're freaking out. Right. And so that's an inability to emotionally regulate.
Okay.
Or it can happen in much more subtle ways in relationship. It can just be with a coworker, very often in romantic relationships where on the surface it seems like nothing really happened, but after that date or that experience, you're either inconsolably upset, you're totally numbed out, you can't feel anything, and it's really confusing. And then people shame themselves, right? Like, what's wrong with me? I just had this nice date. Right? Jade probably would experience one of those too after her experiences, because she doesn't realize that her trauma from her uncle sexually assaulting her
is still impacting her today.
Because she's so high functioning in all other areas of her life.
Right.
So EMDR.
EMDR, what is that?
So EMDR, totally blanking on the name of the woman who came up with it. Yes. So this woman was going through a divorce and would take these long walks on the beach and notice that...
New York, Central Park.
Was that what it was? Wow. Wow. Thank you. It's so funny. It's like a game of telephone. For whatever reason, I heard that. But she noticed that she would actually feel better in a very different, more grounded way, as if she had actually made progress around the issues that were coming up. She got really curious and realized that her eyes were scanning a lot.
It was these birds. She was watching these birds go back and forth. At least that's the story I heard.
That's so funny. I heard it was a beach. This is awesome. Anyway, bottom line is she just started tinkering with this and started using like a wand to have her clients follow and move their eyes. Long story short, she discovered, and science has backed up, that by engaging both sides of your brain, you're able to process traumas that are stuck in your body. My favorite piece of science around this is they did this experiment with mice where they basically traumatized mice by ringing a bell and electric shocking them. Yay, science.
Yay, science.
And then they had this chemical they could inject that wipes your short-term memory completely clear. And what they would do then is ring the bell. It's the Men in Black. Yeah, right? I'm surprised
you don't snort it?
And we can talk offline. I know a guy. Yeah, I know a guy for it.
All right.
So then they would ring the bell, inject the mouse, and then wait, 10 minutes. And they rang the bell, and the mouse acted as if it didn't even really know what a bell was. And what that shows us is that we can't hold things in both long-term and short-term memory store at the same time. You can only hold a memory in one place.
Okay.
With trauma, you'll bring up the memory. It impacts you as if you're still living in that memory. So you're 10, you're 5, you're whatever.
So you're there.
You're in it. That's why you get so dysregulated and outside your window of tolerance every time it gets activated. Basically, trauma is something that's too much for you to process at the time it happens.
Okay.
And your survival mechanism is to just store it for later. The problem being we don't really have mechanisms for processing it later. It's a glitch in our wiring, really. And so the memory comes up when you're triggered. You feel like you're 7 watching your mom being beaten or something. I mean, that's pretty dark, but you know what I'm saying? And then it goes right back into your long-term store. So EMDR says, bring it up in a very structured, safe, slow environment. We bring the trauma up. We access either through hand buzzers, sounds, or your eyes. We get you to access both hemispheres of your brain.
And what Dylan's talking about is bilateral stimulation. That's the term. We call it BLS. It's the moving of the eyes or sound or even tapping bilaterally in the body.
EMDR is such a mystery to me. So why does accessing both sides of your brain help ameliorate the trauma?
That is the part that science can't explain. It's so funny because EMDR is an evidence-based scientific treatment, but they cannot explain this one piece. They think it has something to do with like REM sleep. Like literally they will tell you this is a completely evidence-based protocol, but they can't explain why. And I think that's such an interesting
I can throw out my little two-bit theory, the basic thing about therapy is internal movement. So with physical therapy, if you've got an injury, your body atrophies around that area and you compensate by like moving your left leg more, and your left leg gets more muscle, and then your body gets out of whack. And what a physical therapist does is they go in and they move the energy around. They make you use that leg and use the stuff and move the blood and get things going so that your body can do its thing. I can't imagine the psyche is any different, that things get stuck, like you said, stuck in one department or another, and that there's no science to back up what I'm saying. It's got to be healthy to access the whole of something. Right. It has to be.
Absolutely.
How could it not be?
Absolutely. And I believe that's what EMDR does. At least the EMDR that I've done, like personally for myself, it's like the trauma is still there. The trauma that I remember is still there. It's that R in EMDR. It's been reprocessed. So before, where I was seeing this kind of violent, horrible situation as a kid, and I'm there and I'm scared, now I see how the adults in the situation just didn't know how to communicate and didn't know how to handle their stuff.
That's awesome. So back to Jade.
So here's what I'm thinking about Jade. If Jade or her friend came to me, I would say, well, of those three categories, for most important for Jade, because trauma seems to be her main issue, would be the orientation. She needs a trauma-based specialist, which can be EMDR, sensorimotor, somatic experiencing. There's brain spotting. There's a few others, but
many more.
That would be the top priority. I would say second for Jade would be a female therapist.
Yeah, because it'd be too much.
You can play with that either way in terms of, like Anicia was saying, well, maybe you want to work with somebody you're more comfortable with.
More than likely, Jade's probably not going to want to, since she's having trouble dating. And we're talking about, and one of the things I just want to mention, because I am doing this podcast with two white males, is we did not hear Jade's sexual, well, we assume that she's having dates with men.
Right.
We assume that she's white. I don't see a lot of people of color with bright blue hair, but they could. Could. But these are all things that, as a therapist, you're going to take into consideration.
Yeah, certainly.
What do you think, Ben? You got to tell us, gender.
Gender was, in my mind, was female. Sexual orientation was open. I didn't really I was like, because it's
cisgender, then I'm assuming.
I don't know.
Don't mess this up, Ben.
I'll say cisgender just to make it simple, and I hate that term, but that's another story. But we're in Marin County, so we have to use it anyway. So
Ben, you're in so much trouble right now.
That's okay. I don't mind. But I think white. I was kind of doing a composite of like 5 or 6 people that I knew.
I was getting an Asian vibe.
Oh, yeah. See, none of us should be making any assumptions, but these might be important to Jade.
It's ironic that we were saying this is one of the key factors, and we hadn't brought it up.
Right.
Yeah, it's super important. So what I want to kind of clarify about the safe. So we have like the therapist that doesn't occupy the sort of the face and the image of the abuser or the trauma, and then you have the therapist that does. And the first one is pretty obvious; it's safer feeling, and so you can drop in faster. The second one is a reparative experience. So I've had female patients come to me because they have trouble with men.
Yes,
and presumably I'm a nice person. And
I've heard that you might be.
I might be. That's a thing. For instance, Jade might do EMDR with a female, Asian, cisgender, whatever, therapist for, let's say, 5 years or 3 years or whatever it is, and then possibly move on to male therapist in the future.
Absolutely.
But only very, very carefully. And only with the help of her current therapist. So this is a thing, like sometimes patients will move on. I've had several patients that I've discharged because I'm like, you're not getting anything out of this anymore. We've done our thing. You need to move on. And here's 3 therapists that I recommend based on your profile.
Who do like more psychoanalytic, like long-term?
Or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I've discharged people because I felt they needed more trauma work that I just was not cut out for. Or we hit a snag because it was like, you've been sexually assaulted and you're not able to talk about it because I'm a guy. So this is not good for you. You're wasting your time and money. Did you want to add anything on Jade? Anything else, Anicia?
I guess something we haven't mentioned, but, we've talked about gender. We talked about, interestingly enough, I read something the other day that said that the biggest factor of discrepancy between therapist and client that makes a difference is socioeconomic status, which I thought was very strange because how do you know how much money your therapist makes? And,
right.
but
anyway, you know how much you pay them.
Right. And then I read, that's true, right? That's a good point.
That's funny.
And then I read something else that said the biggest factor is, do they look like them? Do they trust them. So I don't know if all these are true, because I think it's different for every person.
Right.
But I think in
Agreed.
Jade's case, we're going to want to bring it back to also financial issues, right? What can she afford?
True.
Insurance,
Yep.
private pay, those
Yep,
are other
yep,
issues
yep,
that
yep,
have to
yes,
be
yes.
considered when thinking about finding a therapist.
I would say that's actually probably a fourth category.
Yeah, it's a big
and
one.
I feel like that's almost.
Can we address that for a few minutes? I think that's incredibly
Yeah,
important. So, to all of you out there, there are three ways that paying a therapist goes. One is out of pocket, which means you just, you pay them the ton of money that they ask for out of your pocket. And the second one is insurance. So in other words, your insurance company has a list of therapists that they send you, and they say, hey, here's a list of underpaid, probably a full caseload, embittered, burnt out therapists that you can choose from that won't return your call.
They're full, and they'll see you in a year.
Yeah. And the third option, or if you're Kaiser, they'll see you once a month.
Yep.
And they have a caseload of like 80.
worst.
And then the third option is having your insurance cover what's called out-of-network individual therapy. And I worked at Bayside with the fabulous Anicia. I was working in the office, much to the chagrin of the other people working there. But I learned a few things. And one of the things I learned was that insurance companies will reimburse once you meet your deductible of say 1,000, 2,000, whatever it is, they'll reimburse often a portion of your therapy. And so what I do as a therapist, when people call me, they say, do you take insurance? I say no. But the first thing I say is, but I can submit what's called a super bill to you, a record of our sessions. You give that to your insurance company and you ask them these questions. You say, what is my deductible and what is your reimbursement rate for out-of-network therapy? I have them write it down.
Good.
And I've noticed I've actually done really good business on that because people don't know these things.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
I had one woman call me. She's like, well, I've been paying my psychiatrist for years. I don't know if I can afford a therapist. I said, well, does your insurance company reimburse for us? Because a psychiatrist usually gets, it's
Yeah.
a doctor, right?
Yeah.
She's like, well, I don't, what do you mean? I said, well, call your insurance company and say these things. And I'll bet you she got a check for 10 grand.
Yeah.
Just out of that conversation.
Probably.
Because she didn't know. And their insurance companies are basically criminals.
They're not
And
going to advertise it.
They're not going to advertise that. So I really walk people through the financial piece very, very carefully. And what I also do is you can also ask the therapist for a sliding scale.
Right.
Right.
They'll slide 20%, 30%, whatever it is. But my whole thing is that if you're going to come to me and pay me, you can't pay me so much money that it creates more anxiety than the therapist is ameliorating. That's ridiculous.
Right.
So like if I have a patient who loses their job, I will slash the rate
Yep.
in
Yep.
half. Because that's the right thing to do, I just got a
up,
fist
Ben.
pound from
Sorry.
Dylan.
I'm sorry you lost your job, but it seems like you no longer afford me. So good luck.
Yeah, that's so fucked
What you
up.
really need now is 2 sessions a week.
Yeah.
I think.
Right.
Yeah. So that's my take on the financial
Help you
piece.
navigate this.
Anisha, did you want to add anything on that? Since
You pretty much nailed everything I would have said about the financial piece, and all the way down to what you would do if a client can't afford your sessions anymore.
Dylan?
So the irony is that most of the therapists that take insurance are generally newer to the profession because they're trying to build up a practice. Those of us, the three of us, aren't on insurance panels
No.
and our practices are full. And that's because we are good. We're good at what
Because
we
we're
do. We have
awesome.
reputations.
We are good, and we live in affluent areas.
Yeah. So,
but
like
you're
when
right.
people come to me and, it's hard, or a friend comes to me and says, I have this insurance, and maybe it's one of the insurances that's really like lower end.
Horrible.
It sucks. And it's ironic that in our field, the most lower socioeconomic people that have the worst insurance have the least access to care. And it's hard. Then there's the whole, how do we deal with that in our own personal practices to find, some kind of equity? It's tough though, because what do you tell people who say, I have this insurance? What should I do? And you feel like, that insurance?
Yeah.
I've noticed the lower the socioeconomic bracket, the harder it is to get them in the office because their lives are so chaotic usually because they can't afford even to like walk out their front door.
Right.
And oftentimes the reason that they don't have a lot of money and a lot of resources is because there's something really, several really serious issues going on in their lives that are just causing all this chaos. And so I end up actually doing a lot more work for those folks, which I'm happy to do, but I have a hell of a time keeping people, charge them $50, $20, $5. What can you afford? Come on in, It's hard to get them in. Do you have this experience?
I have had that experience, whether it's chaos in the family system, I have a job, I can't make it, I can't get away for an hour. I learned when I worked at Marin Services for Women, which was a very kind of a low socioeconomic facility for women in Marin County. It's defunct now, but they said that, when people are getting treatment, you want them to contribute anything, whether even if it's $1, right? Even if it's $1, have them pay something, and that'll keep them coming. But I do find that when people are managing lower socioeconomic issues, like you said, there's more chaos, there's more stuff going on.
Yeah.
It can be hard. And I don't know that there is, I'm going to feel like a jerk saying this, but I guess in a sense, the higher your socioeconomic status, am I going to say this? Maybe the more organized you are. I find that the people who make the least amount of money that I'm willing to see will just be like, oh, I forgot. And I'm like, you have a calendar? You're not putting everything in Outlook like me every second. Like, what are you doing? And they're like, no, I'm seeing you on my phone. I don't have a computer, So it is hard. Yeah. It's a hard thing.
Yeah.
Did we wrap up, Jade?
I kind of feel like we did. Anicia, you give us a case. I think I gave a case.
Great.
Anicia's going to give us a case, and then Dylan's going to give us a case.
Man.
Wonderful. Okay.
Do you need a minute?
No, I think I'm just going to shoot off. Let's see. We've got a 24-year-old Black male who is not really sure why he is calling for therapy, but his girlfriend says he has to. He thinks everything is actually just fine, but she says he's got some issues he needs to work on. They were talking the other day, and he kind of pushed her, and she said, you can't put hands on me, you need help. He doesn't think he has anger issues, but he does think he has some issues with his father, who was quite angry and violent, but he doesn't think that really impacts him today. This is just what his girlfriend said. He has a good job, stable job. He is willing to pay private pay, and he's not quite sure what to do. And he's not very comfortable with white people.
Okay. Dylan, you want to start?
Just for context, Anicia, would you define the term culturally competent therapist for us?
I kind of associate this as well with like competent in the LGBTQIA, that you're aware of the issues, that you're an ally, that you're supportive of the issues. But the most important piece, I think, especially if you're someone who is not of the culture that you're talking to someone about, and you're not, let's say, queer or gay, is that you are open to not knowing, that you are open to learning. And not that you want your client to come in and be a teacher, but that you don't have the stance of the know-it-all in the room, right? That you are very open to, hey, what's that like? I'll be honest with you. I wanted to find a Black therapist who was a female, who knew somatic stuff and also EMDR. And I wanted her to be a Marin. And I found myself several times. Several times.
That's funny.
She does not exist. I am here, but that other woman does not exist.
That's really hilarious.
I found my therapist, Dr. Kate Brennan. Love you.
Shout out.
She is a white woman. And what happens when racial issues come up is she's like, what was it like telling that to a white woman? She will sometimes bring up racial stuff that I haven't even thought of yet. And so to bring that to the table and to not shy away from it, to not skirt around it, eggshell around it, is why I consider Kate to be a culturally competent therapist, even though she is a super white woman. She's open, she's accepting, she brings it to the surface, she doesn't shy away from it. And I think that's what it entails to be a culturally competent therapist.
And I asked that because I think that would be great for this. What's this young man's name? That just for the sake, you're like, what do I say is the perfect name for a Black guy that isn't too racist? It's a real guy. That's awesome. I thought you were thinking like, what's like a Black name, but not like too Black of a name.
We'll call him Dominic.
Dominic.
Like
nice.
that.
All right, Dom. Can I go with Dom?
You can call him Dom.
All right, nice to meet you, Dom.
So if I was Dom's friend or maybe his girlfriend's therapist and wanted to help, I would love to find him a younger heterosexual Black male therapist that has some experience working with people with anger issues.
And tell us why you would want a younger heterosexual did you say Black male therapist?
Yeah, because kind of going into these issues of transference and just comfort level. In my experience, especially with young Black men, their experience in the world, there can be some distrust with white men. I think that when you're dealing with anger as a primary issue, oftentimes a male works better with a male because they feel like they're just understood. You don't have to explain. You just automatically feel there's a lot you don't have to explain. You come into the experience saying, you're just by looking at you, I feel like I can assume that I don't have to explain a lot.
And can I add that also, like I've had a female therapist in the past, and I felt some trepidation about bringing up anger issues with her because I didn't want to offend her or
Yeah.
scare her. And that was all my shit.
Yeah.
Right.
Interesting.
Which is why for you, it was good to work through that with a female therapist.
Yeah.
Very possibly.
Yeah, possibly.
At that
Yeah.
time.
I love that you said that. I think it is astonishing the level of trust that is missing with Black people and white people, you know, and obviously we know it goes back 400 years and continues to be an issue today. But I love that you said that he is going to need, there's going to be trust issues. He's going to need someone that can mirror him, someone that looks like him. I don't know if male's the best choice because he's got the issues with his dad, right? But that would be his choice, right?
Yeah.
He could tell whatever therapist he's looking for, what he's looking for.
Yeah.
But I like
That's
that.
true. And the reason I originally said what's culturally competent is because there's very few therapists that match this description. I know too.
Right.
And I've been doing this almost a decade.
Right.
For instance, I see younger Black, Latino, and Asian males in my practice.
And you do very
I've
well
worked
with
really hard to be culturally competent. And so if I was Dom, I would just straight up ask the therapist, how many young Black men have you worked with before, and how did that go?
That's a good question.
Because
So
I'm like you. I just say, first session, I'm white.
Right.
What's
I
that
mean,
like
and
for
I
you?
referred
Yeah.
to you, someone
Yeah.
who was a person of color that really wanted a person of color. And I was like, well, he's not. I mean, if you consider Jewish color, fine, but
Yeah.
but he
It's
is
a thing,
culturally
but it's not a
competent.
color.
And I
Yeah.
think it worked out. I think he really liked
He's
you.
he's heading to treatment
he's
this
still
next
with
week.
you.
Yeah,
Awesome.
he's going fantastic. I love that guy. Not going to say his name though. Shout out, you know who you are.
So what we're talking about is when you call a therapist, usually when someone calls me, I do a 15-minute interview with them. You know, I don't charge them or anything like that. I encourage them to ask me as many questions as possible. So what we're talking about here is what questions do you want to fire out at your at this potential therapist on the phone for about 10 minutes?
Yes.
And of course, one is, have you seen such and have you seen people like me? This is who I am. Have
Yes.
you worked with people like and how did that go?
Have you seen people like me, and have you worked with people with my issues? And
Perfect.
how did that go?
Yes.
Yeah. And
How
what do you
much
do with people?
experience do you have?
Yeah. And what does your process look like? Like when people come to see me or talk to me, I say, look, this is my process. I do hardcore case management at the outset of therapy. I make sure that all the fires in your life are more or less out because there's no point in doing therapy.
Complicated houseplant theory.
Right.
What?
We talked about the complicated houseplant last time. Remember? Which is like, are you watering yourself? Are you getting sunlight?
Oh, I
Right.
like this.
Making sure that a person is doing their basic self-care case management.
Yeah, well, self-care, but
feel like
no,
I offended you, Ben.
No, you didn't. I
Did
was
you guys
like,
hear that?
I was
What?
trying to remember complicated houseplant.
Wow.
Um,
I mentioned this at our.
this is a man who kills his houseplants, obviously.
I've seen it.
So Anicia and I've shared an office for years. By the way.
Anyway, you put out all the not just self care, but like let's say they have a major PTSD issue. I'm not going to get into longer term deep analytic therapy if they're having panic attacks. Like, do they need to go see a doctor?
Yeah.
Do they need to?
Right.
Do they need to detox? Do they need to blah 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 blah? Anyway, and then as we get to know each other, things start to expand. I get into family issues. I do family systems work. I explain what that means. I even do dream analysis, but maybe that's not for you. I talk about motivational interviewing. Like I can be super goal oriented and like this is what you want, and depending on what they need. So I describe very concretely the kinds of modalities that I employ and what that is and what it actually means, so that I kind of give them a little lecture.
Yeah.
And that's how I do it.
Same.
Great.
Yeah.
You didn't say about Dom what you would do.
I feel like you kind of got it.
He's a tough one because he doesn't present any issues.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
There's
I'm
not a lot.
fine.
I'm just here so I won't get fined.
Yeah, like maybe he needs a couples
Yeah.
therapist.
I think he's also a guy who probably doesn't believe in therapy. He's got to buy into the process. One of the things that Dom would need to understand is that he's got to give the therapy a chance. Like he's got to give it like 6 sessions or 10 sessions or whatever it
That's
is.
a good point.
A lot of people think that therapy is, especially you see this a lot in recovery, where they think the family sends somebody into treatment and they think it's like sending the car into the shop.
Right.
It's not that. It's a
Right.
long process. You're not going to just get fixed. So a lot of folks like Dom, who's young and thinks, well, I put hands on my girlfriend and I've got these anger issues. Okay, maybe I accept that. Okay. And I'll just go see this therapist for 3 times to make everybody happy. And then I'll be fixed too, maybe. So Dom needs to come to a better understanding of the process of therapy and buy into it. I would say that would be part of his therapy.
Yeah.
Someone like Jade, I think, would be like, okay, yes, please put me in therapy.
Right.
Whereas Dom would be like, "Mm."
Right.
And how does Dom get there? I think Dom would need a therapist who would not push back too much at first. If he's ambivalent, that therapist would need to be be very reflective, not too confrontational. I have a hard time with that because I'm a very confrontational therapist. So I have to really shut my mouth, and like I actually will sit on I will kind of like put my hand on my chin,
Hold it closed.
like I'm not going to talk here. So like for every word I don't say, I give myself a point.
Oh,
Nice.
yeah.
You know,
What's your high score?
my 7. So that would be my thing.
Do you think motivational interviewing, in a sense, would be good with Dom?
So motivational interviewing is when you to ask the person, like someone says, well, I want to become a doctor and go to medical school. I'm like, wow, okay. So motivational interviewing is you ask questions of the patient about what they believe it would take to get to that point and what obstacles are in the way. So you ask them questions, so they answer those questions. It's like I'm interviewing the person, but the questions are pointed in the sense of like, how are you going to drive yourself towards that goal? So the person kind of participates and invents their own plan to get into medical school.
Right.
There's a stage before that, though. That's when they're in pre-contemplation.
So change, right? You're looking for change. So it's like, what do they need to change to get to?
I mainly employ this in substance abuse and process abuse addiction. But for somebody like this, engaging in the process of emotional work is what I think they need and what their girlfriend thinks they need, but they don't think they need it. So it's a lot of working with that ambivalence and asking them to say, what's working for you about how you currently are interacting with your girlfriend and your relationship with yourself and how you relate to your emotions. And they'll be like, well, it works for me really well in this way. And I say, well, what isn't working for you about it? You know,
I see.
Or what does your girlfriend say about it? Well, you know, sometimes I feel a little down, or sometimes you know my anger gets the best of me, and I really love my girlfriend, and I say, So on the one hand, you're telling me here's what's working for you about it, and on the other hand, you're saying this isn't what's working for you about it. What do you make of that? And you just kind of let them,
Right?
Because it's the same thing. They're generating it. That's in that early stage before they say, I want to change this, and then you say, what do you think it would?
So
take
there's
to
no
get to
stated goal. It's kind of like, you know, the goal as a therapist. You haven't really stated like, hey, maybe you should stop
Just bring them to the well.
hitting your girlfriend
Yeah.
and being a prick.
Yeah, like
Maybe you should don't
and then
do
those
that.
scaling questions, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like where are you with not putting hands on your girlfriend?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you guys think? I just thought about something that we also haven't talked about, and I don't know how much it comes up in Marin or the Bay Area, but religion and spirituality. I've had that question once when I was working for a lower socioeconomic facility. I saw a woman in her home who was disabled. She really wanted to talk about my religious beliefs, and it seemed really important to her. And I don't really have a lot of religious beliefs. I probably consider myself to be agnostic. But when you are managing, especially a lot of Black cultures and populations, there is going to be that piece. I think that's something that, you know, I don't know if it's for Jade or for Dom or whoever, but that is just something else to maybe think about when choosing a therapist. And also, I don't know how open you guys are when people ask you questions like that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I do. So a long time ago, in 2008, when Altamira is a residential treatment center in Sausalito, and it kind of was, shout out to what?
Altamira.
Shout out to Altamira.
Yeah, you work there too. I worked there too.
Everyone. I went there.
I think everyone
so,
is.
yeah.
Oh, you went there. Oh, you actually.
We all have been there.
You went there. Yeah, and I was working under the auspices of the fabulous Krista Gilbert.
Oh.
Do you know who she is?
Yeah, she came back. She was the CEO when I
Yeah,
left
and
a
now
couple
she's
years
like
ago.
she like owns every rehab in the world. She's amazing. Anyway, so back then I was really anti-religion. Like I thought, religion, you know, and just the whole, I just was like spirituality, new age crap, religion. It's all in one big bucket, and I'm gonna go piss on it. Like, and I thought I had won the lottery, by the way, by getting this job, because it's like Altamira is like, it's palatial. It's like you can see Angel Island, you can see Alcatraz. There's a big deck. It's incredible.
Beautiful.
It's beautiful. I wasn't a therapist. I was basically an intern. I was like not even an intern. I was like
Tech.
Go do things. Go drive these people. And I get there, and someone walks up to me and hands me these keys. And I'm like, what are you handing me these keys? Well, you're driving the clients to church. I'm like, what? Like, not only do I not really know how to drive a van, but I hate church. And they're like, and not only are you driving the van to church, but the church is across the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco in the Tenderloin.
Oh, fun.
And there's no parking, so you have to find a valet and deal with all that and not lose the patients in the Tenderloin, which is full of drugs and alcohol. So make sure nobody relapses. Okay. So I was like, this really sucks. I hate church. I hate all this. My life is over. But I managed, I drove into the city. I valet parked And got heroin, and we got into the church. It's called Glide Memorial. And I walked in there and it was like a party, man. Like there was no cross on the wall. Yeah. And they were like, we love everybody. We want you atheists and Republicans and liberals and Catholics. And we take everybody. And they had a band and a choir, and they had, people modeling clothing and prancing up and down the stage. And there was birthday cake for some fucking reason. And there was like 1,000 people. And it was just the most incredible. I'm like, oh, this is what church is supposed to be. Yeah. That was my transformation. And it happened in about 20 minutes. And I was like, I've been full of shit for years. And ever since then, I've had a lot more respect for religion and spirituality. I mean, I see religion as basically super organized spirituality. Basically, it's like it's taking the revelations that you have as a spiritual person and putting them into some order so that you can form a culture and a kind of a process. Anyway, that's another discussion. But what I do now is that when somebody has a belief, I step into it completely. I believe it. With them. If someone talks to me about Jesus, I'm talking about Jesus. And I understand that's probably not for everybody, because Jesus can represent some pretty horrible things for a lot of folks who have had some pretty hard connection with the church. Or if they're into Buddhism, I step into Buddhism. I'll try to be culturally, what was the word? Competent and like ask questions and kind of figure it out. But as far as I'm concerned, someone's connection to a higher power is really a connection to self. That a Buddhist and a Catholic priest and an atheist, they all do the same thing. If they're all spiritually inclined, the Catholic priest will pray, the Buddhist might meditate, and the atheist might also meditate or do gardening or whatever, but it's all a connection to something deeper. And as far as I'm concerned, it's all the same shit. And I felt that palpably all those years ago. Like, it's all the same. Oh my God, it's all the same. Everyone's believing the same thing and they don't even know it. And that's what I bring. That's how I do it. My speech is over.
I like that. I like the idea of stepping into it with the client. It reminds me of my grandmother. The idea of heaven and hell to me are kind of like cartoons in a sense. But my grandmother, bless her heart, she raised me. She died about 12 years ago. She could not wait to get to heaven. And God forbid, if somebody asks me where my grandmother is, she's in fucking heaven. Like, that is where she is. Awesome. And I don't know if that exists, but that's where she is. So
God forbid.
God forbid. God forbid. God forbid. Exactly.
So how do you manage it when someone comes to you with stuff that you're like, it's kind of cartoonish?
That's a really good question. I never want to be fake or phony or inauthentic, right? But I do step into it with them. And if I don't know something, I will ask, like, okay, well, with your beliefs, how does this work for you? With your religion, how does this work for you? And I noticed that when you have that stance, you rarely get the like, well, do you believe in God? It's like if you're open to whatever, no one really questions. And I find that I got more of those questions when I worked with populations that were more lower socioeconomic, which unfortunately also was more culturally diverse.
Dylan, how do you manage this issue?
I'm not religious. And I don't want to say I'm the most spiritual, but I might be the most okay with talking about God actually in my life in a very, very general way. I'm not religious, but I'm very much spiritual. And also the research shows that having a higher power or religion or anything in your life is a great resource for people. Yeah. And so I immediately, when people bring it up, I go there first and say, that's fantastic. The research shows that people with faith tend to do better in therapy.
Is that true?
I mean, it's when you take your community mental health class, when you're assessing a client to see what their resources are, this is a important resource. And if they bring it up, you want to help them to nurture that, put energy into it, and lean on it. Okay. So I don't know that there's a specific study I can point to that says you will do 20%.
Well, it's community, therapy, right? I mean, regardless of how far on the spectrum they are of like cult or just going to church, it's community, it's faith, it's hopefulness. I mean, there's a lot of aspects that come with spirituality and religion that I think are very positive.
Yeah. That's how I sell Alcoholics Anonymous to people. Say, I hate religion, I don't want to go to AA, and it's like, bro, it's it's community, accountability, structure, and faith in the process. It doesn't have to do anything to do with God.
Are people out there still saying that? If you need help and you're not going to AA because you think you're not religious, you are really fucking it up.
Oh, snap.
Well said. Well said. Yes, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I hear it all the time.
This would be a nice segue into my client.
All right.
My client.
Your client. All right.
And since this is a San Francisco-based podcast, I'm going to give you my number one San Francisco client composite, which is the early 50s gay man, cisgender, meth addict who has a cross addiction with sex.
I know him.
Yes, we all have had this one.
That's several of him.
Yeah, several of him.
They're tough, man.
Yeah. We're gonna call this guy Travis.
Oh, I like that.
So Travis is like 50. He works in tech. Duh. He generally he makes a good salary in tech. Historically, he also comes from like the Midwest or the South or something. Relocated here. Picked up meth through Grindr.
What is Grindr?
Grindr is the hookup sex app for gay men. And so this is the story I hear a lot is, people are just living their life in San Francisco and everything's generally okay, kind of going along, making a living, boyfriends here and there, sex here and there. And then eventually they're hooking up with some guy and the guy offers them meth and they go, what the hell?
Why not?
The guy's like, this is going to make sex so much better. Oh, you got to do it. They try it. The sex is absolutely astronomical, best sex of their life.
Yeah.
And then they go, I want to do that again.
Yeah.
And next thing they know, they're addicted to methamphetamines, hooking up left and right.
Sometimes like dozens and dozens of people in a weekend.
Yeah.
Sex produces like 500 units of something or other in the brain. I don't know, serotonin or dopamine or oxytocin. It's something else. It's not that.
Sexy neurons.
But methamphetamine adds 1,000 to that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
It's the
so,
most powerful cross addiction I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
because not only does it open them up to just sex, but a lot of them are like, it just, they feel liberated. They feel
Disinhibiting.
just totally like they can suddenly come out and be themselves in heavy quotes and talk to anybody and do anything. And it's so releasing. And I think also just the stigma of being gay, suddenly you don't give a fuck. It's just
Right.
Well, and I think with a lot of gay men, what I've noticed is that, especially in San Francisco, there's enough community and there's enough, there's just like a lot of people really thrive with community, friendships, work, finances.
Right.
And a lot of the deeper shame and issues that came from growing up in Nebraska with religious parents get shoved because there's just enough good going in their
Right.
lives. And then somehow addiction sneaks in
Creeps in.
and finds that dark, empty,
Yeah.
hurt place inside them and fills that hole. And next thing you know, the addiction takes over. And then when you get them in treatment,
Yep.
you have to then attend to that tender, dark place inside them that's never gotten attention.
Can I add a little chunk? The analogy that I use for addiction is pretend you've got two people. One is in a cold environment, right? One is a little heavier, a little stockier, built for the cold. And the other one is kind of thin. And the thin one has been in the environment so long they don't even know it's cold. They don't even notice it. And then you throw a couple sweaters in the dryer and you throw each of them the sweater. Who's going to enjoy the sweater more? The skinny guy, right? So the delta between their normal state, their unconscious normal state of pain and the relief is extreme.
Correct.
So I think that with addiction, people are carrying these wounds and carrying pain, anxiety, depression, don't even know it.
Right.
And suddenly this substance comes along and takes them to the frickin' moon. It must be amazing.
It is, Ben.
It is. And anyway, that's my little side piece on addiction.
So we can all agree Travis needs inpatient treatment.
How long?
30-day minimum. Obviously, 90 days is what we recommend.
Right.
As the
90
industry
definitely
standard.
for meth.
Industry standard for all people with severe drug addiction. But Travis is getting out of 90-day treatment and needs to reintegrate back into life, figure it out. And the whole reason I brought this up is we're talking about AA. We're talking about these spiritual communities and what Travis is going to need to get into recovery and overcome this really debilitating addiction. And then when we look at these three areas, right? Specialty, kind of the male versus female therapist demographic or just this other demographic. How does Travis rank those things in choosing a therapist? Anicia, what do you think?
Well, I think what's interesting is that this might be the first case where there's just predominantly different cultural diversity issues. So it's like, does he want someone who's gay? Does he want someone who's a man? Or does he want someone who's experienced with addiction? Because that is a question that I got asked more than not. Well, a lot as being an addiction therapist that is not someone who is suffering from addiction from drugs or alcohol. And so a lot of times addicts want to know, have you been here? Have you experienced what I'm experiencing? And my professional opinion is that you don't need to help them. Obviously, I have to say that being an addiction specialist is not an
That would
addict.
be bad.
But it is something that I find more times than not addicts really want to know. And really, that's going to be up to Travis what he feels he needs. If he could find a gay male therapist who is also in recovery, boom. This is the kind of client that I would refer to you, Dylan, not because you're gay. Because you're not gay, we're cut that part. But because you really work well with this clientele. Does Travis have trauma?
Emotional. Travis has what we call relational attachment trauma, having really felt completely alone and abandoned emotionally in his Nebraska Christian conservative family.
Yeah,
and he was
and
he knew he was gay from a young age, kind of more flamboyant, teased a lot, and his parents told him like, man up, find Jesus.
It's a lot of
He might have
developmental
even
trauma,
had
right?
that, what's that horrible therapy called?
Conversion?
Yeah,
Did he get-
he had some conversion.
Did he get
therapy.
disowned?
No, he left as soon as he graduated high school. He went to college, UC Berkeley. Super bright. You
Do
know
his
what I mean?
parents still speak to him?
They have a very fake relationship where he only tells them what he thinks they want to hear. They don't really approve. They've changed a little bit. They know he's gay.
His mom is in
but-
denial, though, isn't she? She still thinks he might convert and start dating women. She wants grandkids.
Who knows? I haven't, Yeah, Bertha is a piece of work. But and Jedediah will be the dead.
Oh,
Bertha, Jedediah.
Wow.
Story as old as time. So, that's another issue because we talk about family systems is something you brought up too. And I think when anybody who works in addiction also needs to have experience and even a specialty in family systems because addiction and family of origin are so
it's everything.
intimately
Hand in hand.
connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would do
Absolutely.
these genograms, which genograms are basically circles are women, squares are men. I'm not going to get into the cis thing. I'm just going to say that that's how that is. And then you do this little graph on the thing. And it's
Bowen wasn't into the
Thank
cisgender and
fucking
pronouns.
God. And
Loser.
so you basically do the generations and you map out the whole family 3 generations back. And you can actually, if you use like a red pen to like indicate addiction and trauma, you can actually see the red flowing downhill from like a grandparent that like lost a child or hurt somebody or committed suicide. And you can see, it's so obvious. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. What would you say about Travis if he's like super isolated? Because a lot of times gay men in their 50s and 60s, they're kind of thrown out by the gay community a lot of times. And I've heard...
I just heard that they're old after 30. A client told me this. A gay client told me, he's like, I'm turning 30 and then I'm old and I'm done. And I'm like,
oh my God.
well, fuck.
Well, because
I'm
they're so
Interesting,
wrapped up
Travis.
in image. This is what I've been told, right? They're so wrapped up in image that they get thrown out and they get lonely, and it's just it's the saddest thing.
Very sad.
And so a lot of these folks need to access community, and so I recommend Crystal Meth Anonymous. And you can stand up at a meeting and say, I'm so-and-so, I've got this thing. I'm also looking for a therapist. Does anybody here have an awesome therapist? And you can do that, and you'll be swarmed at the end of the meeting. So meetings are a really great way if you are have a chemical dependency issue to find a therapist, really.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's as saturated as psychology today, but just to throw it out there, there's also Lunesta for the gay and, for the LGBTQIA.
What's that?
What is Lunesta?
It's like a psychology today for queer people.
Really?
For queer folks, yeah. I think that's what it's called. Oh my God, am I making that name up?
Is it
Lunesta?
actually a
I know that's
website
a
and everything?
sleeping
I mean, that is a
medication,
sleep
yeah.
med.
Yeah,
Let me
it's
make sure I'm not making that up.
Would you, Ben, would you see Travis?
Would I see Travis?
Coming out of inpatient 90 days?
Yeah, in a second.
How would you work with Travis in your practice? If
With
Travis came to you?
Travis, I would work with him the way I'd work with any other patient who's coming out of treatment. I would make sure that he had a solid program, that he was going to meetings, that he
What's
had
a program?
A program is you go to CMA or AA or NA meetings, I would say 5 to 6 times a week. You get a sponsor, and the sponsor is someone who helps you work the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous or whatever piece you're in. And you practice rigorous self-care. You read the big book on a daily basis. You pray on a daily basis. You devote 1 to 2 hours per day to your recovery in some form every day, if you possibly can. You keep 3 phone numbers in your phone, for 5 or 10 of them, of people that you call when you're craving. So I make sure that all that stuff is in place. I make sure that they have a doctor's appointment, that they see their doctor. That maybe if they're alcoholic too, get your liver checked out, get your blood levels checked. I make sure that he has community. I mean, that part of AA and NA and all those things is having friends around you, having human beings that you can like hug. I would. Oh, what am I leaving out? I feel like I'm leaving something out.
That was pretty comprehensive.
Yeah,
just
very.
the basics, and then really after a while, what I find is at the end of the day, like when you really get to know somebody, the cultural and the sexual identity pieces, they are present and they are important. And once you form an authentic, deep relationship with a human being, it's human to human. And it's just like, I'm working, because when I worked in treatment at Foundations as a therapist, I had all these people come into my office that I never would have met in a million years. Especially, like gay Asian men who it's like like who are you? Like I don't know anything about your culture or your orientation, nothing. And I would interview them and ask them questions like you were saying earlier. And after a while, it just became me and that human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
Wait, it's how do you get from point A to point B?
Okay,
Right.
so
I'm agreeing with you.
So one of the things I do is I'm very transparent with my patients. If they want to know if I'm gay, I'll tell them, no, I'm not. If they want to know if you're a drug addict, no, I'm not. That's just me. I'm very forthcoming about who I am and what I do on a daily basis and what kind of human being I am. So I form that bond of trust. Yeah. So
as a side note, it's actually gay Lesta, not
Yes.
Lunesta.
gay Lesta.
It's gay Lesta.
Which is a little ridiculous sounding. Gay Lesta?
It is.
What is that?
Is. So it's a
Why-
you can
why
go
not?
to this website and you can find, this is where I think therapists who are queer of some kind would advertise themselves, and people who are looking for someone queer can go there to find someone
Well, it's an awesome idea with a
with a crazy name.
terrible name.
I would say for Travis, it's most important that he has someone who's an addiction specialist before he finds someone who's male or gay or
Yes,
of a certain
100%.
age.
And the tricky part
why
about this-
do we feel that way?
Well,
Hey,
we feel that way because substance abuse is
For those
as-
listening at home, there's a dog in the room and he's
Yes.
growling.
You hear
At
Biggie
the dog
Smalls
outside.
growling at the dog outside
Yeah.
of the room.
Dog
It's hilarious.
outside, who is larger
No,
than he is and would eat him.
You said, why would we look for someone who has substance abuse first?
yeah, so like the three of us are addiction experts, and we have seen the train wreck of somebody who's not an addiction expert think that they can handle Travis.
Oh man.
And so I think
Oh,
it's
boy.
important that we address
Let's talk about it.
this. If you are Travis or someone you know is Travis, and they go, I found this therapist. They're so great. This gay guy in his 50s, and he's also from Nebraska. And he's so cool, and I just relate to him. But this person is not an addiction expert. Why is this a really bad idea for Travis to choose this therapist? And why is this therapist quasi unethical to take this client?
You really need to have experience in substance abuse to work with substance abuse clients. And I want to say this in the least derogatory way that I can. When I first started working in substance abuse, one of my supervisors told me, anytime a client with addiction tells you they had 2 drinks, just double it, just 4. So sadly, one of the symptoms of the disease of addiction is lying. That's not a judgment. It is sadly just
It's a
facts.
damn fact.
And if you are not someone who knows that and you're not experienced with that, you're going to take everything that they say at face value. And another thing I learned early working in substance abuse is, sure, they may very well be lying to you, but as opposed to like, this person's lying, what's wrong with them? It's more like, this is the truth that they need me to believe right now. And I kind of roll with that. Not like I believe it, but it's just like, okay, this is what I'm getting. So if you are still engaging in substances, in particular like meth, right, where it's like really destructing your brain, you're not going to be able to do any other work. So if he's got a therapist who's not addressing, aware, holding his client accountable, then all the other stuff is just kind of bullshit.
Yeah, 100%.
Just,
Can't-
yeah. And the interesting thing is, we're talking about what we would choose for Travis. That's the hard part, right? Because this podcast is about how you choose your own therapist, and Travis might just be like, yeah, I like this gay guy from Nebraska who is about my age and wants to work with me. And depending on where he is with his addiction, he may or may not want to be held accountable.
The other perspective is that we've all known patients who've died, many, right? And once you've experienced that, there's a certain level of, like when somebody comes in and they have a substance abuse issue and they start chiding you for like, well, I don't want to go to a meeting, or it's like there's part of you that does not give one fuck about what they feel. And it's like, I don't care how you feel. Or like when a parent comes to me and says, my teenager wants such and such and such and such, and maybe he's not ready for going away to the wilderness program. Like, do you want your teenager to die?
Right.
And I can say that because I really don't want their teenager to die.
Exactly.
And the other thing I want to say is that if you're finding a therapist who doesn't know about addiction and you have an addiction issue, you are in a way committing suicide. Not as such, but like you are asking for it.
Yeah.
You are asking to die because you are enabling yourself just the way your friends enable you.
I actually almost died
You did?
from that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Personal experience.
Do you wish to say?
My first real therapist was not an addiction specialist. I was an addict. And that therapist saw me for years where I made no progress, was steadily declining, and never would. Like I remember this one time, I lied and said I was sober because I had tried to quit pills for a while, and maybe was like I was never really sober, but I think I like got off opiates for like a couple weeks or a month or something,
Right.
and then was like, are you, like, I came in one day and I remember he was like, are you still sober? I was like,
What?
yeah.
of course.
He's like, God, it's
I
been like
am.
6 months. That's a really big deal. I'm like, you know. And you know what I mean? I look
Right.
back on that and I'm like,
Right.
anybody who is even a quasi-addiction
Mhm.
competent would see through that
Absolutely.
in a second. And then when I finally went to rehab, got sober, I looked back on this experience and went, that was messed up.
Yeah.
Who's
And
taking
then
your
there's
money?
the cross addiction
Yeah.
piece too. It's like, well, I haven't taken opiates in months. Are you still drinking? Oh, just, the
Yeah, but
weekends.
it's just alcohol.
Yeah,
Right.
just alcohol. on the
Or
Or
weekends.
it's just one.
It's just
right. It's
or-
just one.
or-
But you
yeah.
find out that one is a 2-liter.
my favorite is that, well, it's just white wine. It's just beer. It's not liquor, so it's not really drinking.
It's fine.
You know. Oh man.
Here's the one that I think separates like an addiction specialist from a non is, I don't really like AA meetings, but I love therapy. I think I'm just not going to do AA, but I'll see you twice a week. What do you think? The non-addiction specialist is like their
Yeah.
ego pops up.
Yeah,
They're like,
I like
totally.
that.
Sounds
Yeah, that
great.
sounds
And a
That's a
lot
great
of times
idea.
that therapist is a pawn because they want to make their wife or husband or child happy.
We're enabling them. I mean, the therapist that takes that client on is enabling them because they're in treatment. They're
Yeah.
getting help. They're
Yeah.
working on their addiction.
I've actually refused patients. Like, can I see you 3 times? Like, no, you need to go to AA meetings.
No.
Like, I'd love to
Yes.
take your money, but no.
Right.
Because-
I'm your therapist, not your AA,
And
not
I'm
your
not,
sponsor.
and I'm not gonna assassinate you. You know, it's
Right.
like I could kill you
Right.
in a way.
Exactly.
You know. Anyway, so
Yes.
Dylan and Anicia, I really want to thank you guys for coming in. Dylan for hosting me at your fabulous Marin household, and Anicia for taking the drive out here and bringing your dog. What's his name?
Biggie Smalls. Been a good boy.
You named your dog Biggie Smalls?
Yeah, because he's 14 pounds, so he needs to be intimidating.
Does he rhyme?
Oh yeah, he rhymes.
Does he-
He actually likes it
to
when you
his
call him
game,
Big
yeah.
Papa, but that's,
okay. This has been really fun. I feel like
Yeah.
I've had 10 espressos. So this is
I did have a double shot. Right
I didn't have
before
any
we started,
caffeine,
yeah.
and I feel like I'm full of caffeine.
3.
If there's anything else you guys want to add,
Well, really, just the last thing I want to say is that this whole podcast has been about how to find and choose the right therapist, and I guess my suggestion is to choose and find one.
yeah, I need to do that myself. I had a same therapist for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, he got pretty old, which is fine. He didn't really die. He left. He left.
He abandoned you.
That was
No,
some
he-
dark humor right there.
He abandoned you.
No, he didn't abandon me.
He just left you.
No,
and
he left the
died?
world. He stepped out. He's like, you know what? I'm done. I'm 97. I'm out. And,
Wow.
Jeez.
yeah. So I'm having a hard time replacing him because.
Of course.
Anyway, so that's my.
I feel like we have to maybe do an entire podcast dedicated to helping you
How
find
to help
actually you
find
a
Ben's
therapist.
therapist.
You'll have you'll have a easier time finding me a girlfriend, probably.
I don't know about that.
No.
Neither. It's a tough call. And thank you so much for having us. It really has
Certainly.
been fun.
All right,
I
guys.
love doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. As always, pertinent information regarding this podcast will appear in the program notes. Should you have any questions or wish to be a guest on my show, please drop me a line at benjaminrussick@gmail.com or go to my website at benjaminrussick.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, should you ever find that your plate is full, well, consider getting a bigger plate.